Britain's biggest ever heist took place at the Heathrow Airport depot of security firm Brinks Mat. The aftershocks of this robbery are still being felt 20 years later.
I came to work on 26th of November 1983 at 6:30 in the morning. The other guards were waiting outside. Tony Black wasn't there. He normally was late, so I wasn't too worried.
Black was the brother-in-law of Brian Robinson, who was later convicted of the robbery, and Black was the inside agent. In fact, he overslept and was late for work, and when he arrived, the robbers were already waiting outside, anxious that he had lost his bottle and wasn't actually going to be prepared to help them.
It's Tony Black, who happened to be my radio operator that day. So I let him in, relocking the door, back upstairs. After a couple of moments, there's a big commotion going on, tables and chairs flying, and there's this man running at me with a balaclava type ski mask on, with a gun in his hand. Next minute, I'm on the floor, handcuffed, hooded, taking a kicking. I was then pulled up, taken outside, put in a chair, then using a knife, they cut my trousers, cut my belt, pushed the clothes up over my chest, put a can of petrol under my hood and said, you know what that is? I said, petrol. They told me my name, my address, and that they'd been looking at me for about 8 to 9 months. And they also said that if the police turned up, then we'd all be shot.
Come on! Take the chance, come on! Get your legs moving, come on!
In the loading bay, we had 2 alarms. I wanted to switch them over. Although perhaps the alarms would have not gone off at the unit, but it would have still gone off at the alarm headquarters. But they told me which alarm I had to take off first. So I just said to myself, dear God, what do I do to stay alive and keep my lads alive? And then with a gun at the back of my head and still soaked in petrol, I was then forced to open my combination.
The raiders were through into the vault, but inside the vault were 3 safes containing money and travellers' checks. Each safe needed 2 combinations. Michael had 1, the other was known only to a second guard.
He just couldn't remember it. I mean, all jokes aside, even during the days, sometimes he couldn't even remember it. And I could hear matches being struck. They stabbed him in the hand to make him open the vault, but he still couldn't remember the combination.
They were getting frustrated and being more and more threatening towards the guards. And it was then that their attention turned to this big square pile of boxes in the middle of the vault.
Approximately 3 tonne of gold bullion.
76 boxes. Just a moment. Similar to this. Those boxes will weigh each in the region of 100 weight.
Eventually they managed to get the bullion into a blue van which they drove off with, which was reported by witnesses to be very down on its axles, heavily laden. Whenever a really big job hits the yard, obviously the criminal intelligence branch and the flying squad switch into action, and then a very kind of orderly investigative machine gets set into process of going through the detail of the robbery, of comparing and contrasting the statements of the witnesses to find out if there are any gaps, if what everybody says makes a neat puzzle.
At first, not aware of guard Tony Black's connection to the robbers, the police treated all the guards as potential insiders.
They just kept going through it. One would ask one question and then the other one would say, well, 5 minutes ago you said. So your mind starts to back travel. What did I say 5 minutes ago? And then the other one would jump in and say, well, forget that. What happened next? So your mind is going backwards and forwards like a yo-yo.
Very often you get to a situation where 6 or 7 pieces fit and there's one which just doesn't squeeze in, it's not quite there.
And there was just such a piece in Tony Black's version of events that would prove his undoing.
They asked me, where was Tony Black when the robbers came in the radio room with me? I said he was on the left-hand side of me. They then asked me, did he ever go to the right-hand side? I said no. 2 of them got up and left the room, and the other officer there, I said to him, why are you keep going on about Tony? been on the left-hand side of me. He looked me straight in the eye and he then said, because we found Tony Black's tobacco on the right-hand side of the table. From what I understand is after I was handcuffed and hooded and taken out, he then got up and sat in the chair, ready to answer any telephone calls, and then at the end of the robbery, he was then locked up. But being a smoker, obviously he sat there and had a cigarette. I'll never forgive him. My father went to his grave cursing him.